Good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I want to thank the Italian Chamber of Commerce for having this event, allowing me the opportunity also to speak at it. I'm going to be changing a little bit of what I guess I'm a small company, and we talked a little bit about the relationship that's developing between Canada and the EU. And I want to discuss a little bit about how our company moved from Pau, France, which is in the south of France, to Toronto, Ontario, and a little bit about some of the challenges we came about, but also some of the advantages that we saw, and some of the innovation that actually came out of that transition. So just a little bit of a background. In Pau, when I say small, I do mean small. We're a service company. We don't sell a hardware or get into any type of distribution of technologies. Service company, in Pau we're 7, and here in Toronto we're 8. And just to give you a little bit of context, we started in Pau 9 years ago, and in Toronto 3 years. And so we're already larger than the original office. And there's reasons for that, and we'll touch on those. So Internet Energy Solutions Canada, or Internet Energy Solutions as it's known in Europe, has 3 main branches of business. Our services compile of what we see as a unique business perspective in terms of what we bring to the table as professionals. The first is within building sciences, and what we do is we look to improve the building condition, so how it feels for the people that are inside the building, but also improve the energy use inside of it. And we use a lot of high-tech tools, modeling tools. We also use a lot of the latest materials that are available. So what we look to do is, instead of adding energy needs to the building, we look to remove them. And that's done through a lot of sciences. But these aren't new sciences. These are a lot of sciences that already existed in other industries. And what we're doing now is finally starting to understand how to bring that technology to buildings. And that's essentially one of the pieces of work that we do. The second is within the context of renewable energies. As a company starting off in France 8-9 years ago, it was essential that you understood renewables, that as engineers you worked with renewables, because the context in Europe renewables was definitely gaining steam. So in Europe, we were able to get this experience, and when we came to Toronto, share that experience with our group here. The third one, and what I think makes us a little bit different, especially here in Canada right now, is our dealing and work with greenhouse gas emissions. And when I look at greenhouse gas emissions, we break it out into 2 sectors, the regulatory sector and the voluntary sector. And we do work in both. The regulatory sector requires us to have the certain credentials. It allows us to do verifications for our clients on their greenhouse gas reductions. But also on the voluntary side, you have municipalities, you have large organizations that want to make an emissions reduction. Not necessarily something that they'll get credits for, but they want to build a plan. And that plan is what they see as an opportunity for them, not only to reduce their environmental impact, but they go hand in hand a lot of times with reducing your costs. It goes hand in hand a lot of times with improving your public image. And also, a lot of them find the value in doing their greenhouse gas emissions as another opportunity to understand truly through data collection how their operations are working. So this is an interesting and new developing industry in Canada. So before coming to Canada, there were some things that we had to make sure were here. You can't just jump into a pool without the safety net ready for you. So there were 3 things we really needed to see before we made that switch over. The first one is we needed to see a growing culture of environmental stewardship. And that's not, being happy that you put a park in place and things like that. That's not what we're talking about. What we mean by that is that people are ready to make changes in their business functions so that the environment has a cost, has an opportunity to be part of that decision. So that's very important. The transition from just a financial outlook into a project and how having an environmental perspective on it. So this was one of the first things. The second was a significant policy implementation. This meant that it was going to be supported. So, for instance, in Ontario, we saw the Green Energy Act come about, but in BC, they've been doing things for much longer and putting a lot of the policy pieces in place. So these were important things we needed to see. And then the final one, and most important for a service company, is we need to see strong local resources. And those resources were not only in the number, but the specialization. So in Canada, when we started off, definitely it wasn't there. In Ontario, the amount you would want it, not what we were used to in Europe. But what we were able to do is understand which company or which professions had transferable knowledge or transferable skills that could be used in this industry. So after spending time in Europe, understanding where professionals switched over to this kind of work, we had that understanding coming into Canada. So that's what I mean by local resources. We had to find those same local resources. So coming to Canada, there definitely were some challenges that we had to understand and tackle. The first one, which was talked about by the ambassador, is that climate action in Canada is regionally based. That's basically it. And there's reasons for it based on who has jurisdiction over certain powers to put legislation on certain things. There's other reasons, but basically it was a locally driven policy by a region. So when you're in Canada, you are not really doing business with the whole Canada the same way. You have to understand how each province works differently. And so that is a challenge for sure. The second one is recognizing professional accreditation. There definitely is between the EU and Canada. There is no linkage there right now. Most of Canada's accreditation when it comes to our profession, again, provincially based, or we're seeing adaptation from the United States. And so this is definitely where we see, I guess, a lack of between the EU and Canada as an opportunity for those transferable accreditations. The next one is there's limited cohesion between codes and standards. So, this one's a much more difficult one to tackle, I think. But definitely when you talk about things like building codes and greenhouse gas standards, these are things that are evolving very quickly, or evolving on both sides, and a lot of times we don't see the we don't see the connection between them. So you have to remember about that when you're discussing ideas with colleagues from other countries, that sometimes some things don't work in the other jurisdiction. And then the other one was, and this is actually a very important one. It's not a disadvantage or anything like that, but it's important to understand that the public and private relationships are different in Canada than in Europe. And so what I mean by that is that essentially here in Canada we see a little bit more motion towards the private side in terms of a business being successful here, but also in terms of how a private works with a public, works with a non-for-profit. It's very different than in Europe. And so for a company like ours that's a service and has to manage these relationships, this also was a challenge for us to overcome. The next one is what we saw as our opportunities. And of course, we made the decision to come, so those far outweighed the negatives. But the first one definitely was in Canada, we saw that a huge opportunity for gaining market share just through being a new company, but working hard, making the right connections. We did feel that as a smaller company, we always had an opportunity. And that was something that was important to us. As a smaller company, coming to a country that, we didn't have any references, we didn't have any connections or anything like that. It was important to know that, with hard work and some dedication, we could make our market share what we needed to. The second one is flexibility and accessibility to continued education. And in Canada, we're in Toronto, so we do. But I know it's a similar thing for other major cities in Canada. Let's say the professional education facilities are really good at understanding how to get continued education and how to be flexible with people that are working. And we found this as actually a very good advantage for our workforce. The next one is cultural similarities. That's already been discussed. You know, having an office also in Beijing, we also know that not having too much difference between the cultures helps definitely with communication between the different employees. So that was very important. It's also that relationship between employer-employee and having that similar to Europe. So that was definitely something that we enjoyed, not having to switch kind of the company culture coming here. Listen. And then the last one is Canada had a very strong potential for internal growth. So of course, you know, being in a country, you have your options of working with other places in the world. But being in Canada, of course, one thing we wanted to make sure is that that there was an opportunity for the industry we were in to grow. And within Canada, we were very confident that that was there. So in coming here to Canada, we had to make some transitions. We had to adapt tools. We had to adapt methodologies. And we have some examples of where that adaptation actually gave us a competitive advantage over our other competitors. For instance, when we were working in France, we had a great relationship and worked well with ADEME, which is the Agency for Energy Efficiency and Environment in France. They had developed a tool called Bilan Carbone for the quantification, inventory essentially, and analysis of greenhouse gas emissions for municipalities, for large organizations. They worked many years on this, developing it, understanding how to disseminate it. From that, we were able to learn this knowledge, and when we came to Canada, essentially, with all those lessons learned, we were able, through 2.5 years of R&D work, basically reproduce the same for what's here in Canada. So adapt for Canada. So not only we could do the projects, but others could do the projects with it. And so that was a cooperation between ourselves, ADEME, and NRC. So we were able to take some knowledge, what we knew worked in Europe, and bring it here to Canada with us. And on some of our other projects, we've found a lot of opportunity to actually deal with Europeans directly with some of the technologies that they bring. This is down at Harbourfront Centre. I'm not sure if many of you have been to Toronto, but Toronto's going through a massive redesign on its waterfront. And that waterfront we're working part of with Harbourfront Centre, which is a non-for-profit. It's an arts and culture center. And they have old buildings, they have you know, old traditional ways of doing things, and recognize that if the waterfront's going to change, they see an opportunity for themselves to change. And so we worked with them to develop their greenhouse gas quantification or inventory. And some of the projects that we're now doing at Harbourfront Centre is allowing us to do work with Europeans. So for instance, this building here, the Onway Theatre, which is a theatre and has artists from all over the world performing there all the time. The building was very old. The internal mechanical systems were, you know, not only were they energy hogs, but they were very, they didn't work well. The people inside the building were always too cold, too hot. Lighting systems didn't function well. It was always being in maintenance. So also the envelope, which you see there, the glass, needed to be changed at the same time. So we took a little bit of innovation, some of the technology that we learned in Europe, in particular building integrated photovoltaic. So what that is, and you can see it up on the top there, is that you have the sun basically shining on the exterior part of the building, and it's producing energy at the same time. So the energy feeds right into the building and is used by the loads inside of the building. Not only did we do that, but we added a heat mirror technology, which originated in the United States, but funny enough is used mostly in Europe. And this, what it does is basically remove all of the solar gains that we saw in the summertime. It made the theater basically an oven. And on top of that, and this is what makes this a real unique project and the first one in the world, we added an artistic part to it, because Harbourfront Centre is essentially that arts and culture, and we wanted their identity to be in that building. So we found Sarah Hall, which is an artist out of Toronto that works with a German art glass studio, and created a beautiful, and you can see it here, it's an artistic piece that wraps around the whole building, okay? And the image of it is, it's called Watermark, and it reflects the lakes, the Great Lakes at which Harbourfront Centre is at. So for the first time, we were able to add these all together in one building envelope and create this innovation. But it was necessary for us to have that cooperation with those in Europe. So this is kind of, I think, as a small group, we're pretty happy with the results of coming to Canada, some of the things that we've been able to accomplish, and definitely look forward in the future to keeping that strong link between the two offices. Thank you.